Thank you, Jim, and it's a delight to be with all of you. I, several years ago, was invited to give the commencement address at LSU. Why, I have no clue. It was when Bud Davis was the chancellor, and out of the blue, he called me and said, would you be our commencement speaker? Now, you know, this LSU is big league stuff, huh? And why in the world would they want me to do the commencement address? The only way I could figure it is they had a last-minute cancellation, a president wouldn't show up, or some muckety-muck, and they had to have somebody, so they threw me out, and I did the best I could do. This is what this feels like. It's a slow news day. It's after Thanksgiving. You didn't have anything going, so who can we get? Well, let's call old Andrews and get him out. So here we are. And I always know that when my friend Jim Inkster invites me to do anything, it's always a ride into the unknown. I was on a show some years ago, and we were talking about this and that, and if you've listened to his show, which I'm sure most of you have, he has a way with his producer of pulling up past tapes and things like that. And we were talking about creation and the Bible and these literalists and people that I don't have a whole lot of patience with. And he pulled up a tape that Buddy Romer had made with him, in which it went like this. If you know Buddy, and I'm sitting there in the studio, it's live, and Buddy says on the tape, "Yeah! I'm a Genesis kind of guy." It was all I could do to not just absolutely split my sides open and keep my composure. So thanks to Jim, he can set you up and take you down. So anyway, it's good to be with you. And I am here today to talk about Rebuilding Together Baton Rouge. I want to introduce our board chair just before I forget to. Her name is Karen Ewing. She's a friend of many, many years and is a wonderful, wonderful asset to our organization. Rebuilding Together is a nationwide network of affiliates that is based in Washington, D.C., and that spans, you know, just about every major city in the United States. There's a Rebuilding Together in New Orleans, there's one over in the Acadiana area, and ours here in Baton Rouge are the three that we have in Louisiana. But if you went to Nashville or to San Francisco or to Denver, you'd find Rebuilding Together there. It started as an effort in Texas to just help somebody. A good-hearted woman had the idea that they could do a project in her community, and from there it has grown into this national network of affiliates that number about 150 across the country, whose mission is quite simple. We help elderly, impoverished homeowners stay in their homes by doing repairs of various kinds that they cannot afford or physically do for themselves. And so the work we do is not glamorous work, but it is essential work. And as you know, issues that were not issues have a way of becoming issues as time moves on. So someone who was able to navigate steps 20 years ago can't do that now. They may need a wheelchair ramp. Or someone whose house was just perfect before they got confined to a wheelchair now needs a wider door to get into the bathroom, needs an adjustment in the bathroom to take a shower. Those kinds of things are the things that we do. In addition to that, a big part of our work in Baton Rouge is dealing with substandard housing stock. It will make you weep to drive down some of the streets of our city and see in the United States of America, the richest country on this planet, how human beings are forced to live. It is dreadful. We've walked in houses where literally you can see the sky through the roof and see the ground through the floor. There's a woman on Evangeline Street. I could take you to her house this afternoon. When it rains, she gets an umbrella out to be inside her house because the roof is that porous. That story is repeated by the thousands in Baton Rouge, and we are doing what efforts we can to address that, knowing that we will probably never get it all done. But hope springs eternal, and we are dope stuck on hope, and we do our thing. I brought some literature for you today, and I'll give it to you in a moment, but it gives you some statistics and some of the data points about Rebuilding Together. The organization was started in 2004 through the efforts of Honeywell International, who desired to be a better corporate citizen or a good corporate citizen. They wanted to do some local volunteer things in the community, and so they started this. And for a number of years, it was an organization that did anywhere from 1 to say a dozen projects a year. Rebuilding Together's tradition is that in April, the end of April, there's a national rebuild effort where all the affiliates join hands and blitz their community. And that was primarily what was being done in Baton Rouge through Honeywell's leadership and the involvement of other companies like Turner Industries, ExxonMobil, companies like that. They invited me to come and be a part-time executive director to see if I could grow the organization, which meant fundraising and increasing our productivity. We did that to some degree, and then, as we all know, in August of 2016, this community was inundated by a biblical rain, and the result of that was tragic in so many different ways. But ironically, for Rebuilding Together, I guess it was positive in that it sprung us into a new dimension. We received funding that was enabled us to really ramp up our efforts. So we went from being an organization that was doing from 10, 15, maybe 20 projects in a good year, to an organization that today is doing in excess of 100 projects a year. We do this all with volunteers, a very small staff, and donations from the community. We don't get any federal funding. We receive some grants from companies and through our national office, pass-through grants. But primarily, this is a very grassroots organization, and we're just out there doing the starfish story. You know the starfish story. The guy walking along the beach, thousands of starfish have washed up at a high tide. He's picking them up and throwing them back, and somebody comes to him and says, "Man, you're wasting your time. You can't save all these starfish. What difference is what you're doing making?" And he reaches down and picks one up and throws it into the ocean and says, "Made a difference to that one." And that's how we operate. We make a difference to that one. And we see faces, and we learn names, we learn stories, and we enter into a family's life. And it is a blessing, both for them, but mostly for us who are blessed by them. So Rebuilding Together, Baton Rouge. There's a quote by Norman McLean, who wrote a wonderful book, written several books, but one of his books that this quote's in is Young Men and Fire, which is a chronicle of the tragic deaths of some smoke jumpers in the late 1940s as they fought a fire called the Man Gulch Fire in Montana. Young Man and Fire. And for some reason in this book, in the middle of his chronicling of this event, Norman McLean says this: "A mystery of the universe is how it has managed to survive with so much volunteer help." You're just going to play with that. A mystery of the universe is how it has managed to survive with so much volunteer help. Well, volunteers are the bread and butter of our organization, and without them, we couldn't do the work that we do. We have some recurring volunteer groups. One is called the Silver Hammers. It's a group of Exxon retirees mainly, guys that were too young to just sit at home and sort of veg out, wanted something to do. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, they show up, and we have a job selected for them that we've already scoped out, brought the material to, and tell them what we need doing, and they go at it. We've also had a wonderful group of volunteers called the Mennonites, which Mennonites, follow disasters, and they landed in this community shortly after the 2016 flood, reached out to us, and became one of the principal teams that we could field on a consistent basis. So they would be with us for a week, and then with a group in Denham Springs for a week, and with those groups, we did a tremendous amount of work. Started in Glen Oaks on Tioga Drive, and sort of just stepped into something. We didn't have a grand plan about it, but ended up rebuilding flooded homes, all the homes on Tioga Drive, then moved over to the street behind that, Cliona, and then the next one where we are today, Benson. The secondary and tertiary benefit of what we do is we bring back a neighborhood. And when we got to Tioga Drive, people who lived next door to one another didn't know each other's name, didn't talk to one another, sort of lived behind closed doors, as so much of America does today. By the time we left that street, those same people were having cookouts on the street and inviting their neighbors over and sharing fellowship, the kind of America that some can remember from years ago, and an America that we hope will one day be reality again. So that's it. I mean, you know, it's not glamorous work. As I said, it is work that we do because we are called to do it. Funding is a continual struggle with us, and this literature that I'll provide you shows you some of our financial situation, and you'll see we're going in the wrong direction. But we've learned to live like that. We go in the wrong direction all the time. We always have more need than we have resources for. We are currently hopeful that we are going to be able to open a revenue stream through a secondhand store, which will sell furniture and various items that are donated to us, and then we'll take in turn the proceeds of that, put it back into the work that we need to do to buy lumber and equipment and to keep this work going. With that, Karen, would you be so kind as to maybe, I should have done this earlier, but if you don't mind circulating around and passing out these brochures that I brought. And I have never been criticized for short sermons, so I'll say more in a moment, but I want to stop and see if I've piqued anybody's interest or prompted any question in your mind about what Rebuilding Together Baton Rouge is about. Anything? Yes, sir, Mr. Keller.
The issue of substandard housing has been an issue that folks like John Owens have worked out for years. And one of the comments he made was that housing in Baton Rouge would not pass a windshield inspection.
That is correct.
What is the role of local government in inspecting and getting landlords, for example, to prepare the work?
If I were the mayor, which I will never be, or at the head of some organization like, you know, RDA or now Build Baton Rouge, I would push for a strategic effort that would truly do a scientific assessment of the condition of housing in our community. Or if that's too large, the condition of housing in a certain segment of the community. Pick out the areas of poverty, and we know that a lot of that is in North Baton Rouge. Do a true scientific assessment of what the reality on the ground is. That here's a house that is just fine, and here is a house that the roof is about to fall in. Here is one with inadequate plumbing. Do all of that. I mean, houses are complicated, but they're not that complicated. We all know you got to have a bathroom, you need a kitchen, you need, you know, a structure around you that can keep the elements away. You need the square footage that will allow living to happen in the house. And that's what a house is. There, in today's world, ought to be some matrices that can be used to assess whether a house is adequate for human habitation or not. And this popcorn stuff that we do, where somebody goes over here and does something, then somebody does it over here, while that may have some value, I don't think it's strategically smart, because what we need to do is to renew neighborhoods. A rising tide lifts all ships. And so that's what I would do, Lanny. I would address it in a kind of global sense, and even though that would take quite an effort and be some years in doing, it would be an important thing to do. Habitat for Humanity has made a great impact in this community, and the habitat that we have in Baton Rouge is, if not the leading, then it's within the top 5 of all Habitat affiliates in the United States in terms of its numbers and the houses that they have been able to put people into. If you look at what Habitat does, is they learned that you just don't want to build a house, they build a neighborhood. So they'll go and you'll be able to take adjudicated properties in a certain section, and before they're done, you've got a new street, new houses. That's what I think we ought to do with substandard housing, that kind of thing. So, yes, sir.
Do you think that the city of Baton Rouge or parish is maintaining their public rights of way in front of all these houses that you're working on? Which is a fabulous concept that you have. What's the question?
The question is the city of Baton Rouge maintaining the public right-of-ways? Is that what you're?
You have mounds of couches, tires, other debris,
Right.
real health hazard on the vacant lots, because the vacant lots don't take the water bill, obviously. So everything is mounded up on these lots in between the houses that you're working on.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation, say, for the city parish?
Question is, I think, what about properties that show signs of blight because of debris that's been thrown onto them, and who's responsible for removing the debris and all of that? Again, I think the city needs to address that because, it just doesn't take much to begin to go in the wrong direction. And when you have property that is ugly and nothing more than a dump, then the property next door gets ugly, and it just goes on like that. Years ago, when Tom Ed McHugh was mayor, and we were in some kind of a setting somewhere, I made him kind of angry when I asked, why don't we keep the grass mowed in a better way between the airport and downtown Baton Rouge? Because that's our front door into the community. And at the time, the grass was, good gracious, it was windshield high. Tom Ed didn't like the question at all, said it wasn't an easy thing to, but it's the same point. I mean, you make something look good or you allow it to look bad. And the city needs to take that very seriously. Yeah. All right, I'm just gonna, yes, sir.
So you mentioned like a lot of things that the city parish needs to do in order to like help your work. Have you guys as an organization ever approached the city parish about trying to help them try to address some of these things?
We have been, the question is, has Rebuilding Together ever approached the city parish to see if they would address some of the things that we see that need to be addressed?
You guys help them.
That we help them. We have had some partnership with the city parish, and there's been a lot of change in the internal workings of how the city addresses things like housing. As I'm sure you know, there used to be an Office of Community Development. That has now sort of moved over to Build Baton Rouge, which used to be the Redevelopment Authority. Chris Tyson and his team are over there doing work. But yes, there were opportunities where we partnered with the city parish. They provided material, we provided expertise and labor. So when we did a number of roofs like that, getting a roofing contractor out, they provide that material. It enabled us at our economic capacity to pay the contractor, and everybody walked away happy. So we're doing that. We're in dialogue and working with with Bill Baton Rouge to see if we can sort of crack open the door and access some of the funding that they have resources for and access to that we don't. Quite honestly, part of our problem is, while we have high productivity in terms of work done, we have such a shallow back room. The office, you're looking at the office of Rebuilding Together, along with Karen and her wonderful total volunteer assistance. We don't have that kind of depth that you need to access CDBG funding that comes directly to us. So what we're hoping to be able to do is to kind of do it through the back door. We become, in essence, a employee of, say, Bill Baton Rouge that says, go out and fix this ramp, or employee of Council on Aging that will then give a check to buy material. So that's the kind of thing we're doing. The mayor has called on us on occasion when she has located property that just has touched her heart and said, can you go out and do something? We always try to respond. And that's one of the great things about Rebuilding Together, is that we are nimble, because we do not tie ourselves to federal funds. We don't have to tie ourselves to federal regulations, which, as you appreciate, I'm sure, can be rather onerous. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What is the situation regarding fire alarms that you all see?
What is the situation regarding fire alarms that we've seen? Every time we have a cold snap in Baton Rouge, I shudder, because you watch the news, usually there's some house that will go up in smoke, and tragically a lot of times there's injury, or even worse, life is lost. We have partnered with the Red Cross to install fire alarms in every house that we work on. So we don't leave a house without a fire extinguisher and a fire alarm and an evacuation plan being mapped out for the residents. If you go into a house, as we often do, carpet that is old and very worn, with extension cords running over it and under it and plugged into outlets that were not designed to carry that kind of load, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. A lot of people that we have worked with heat their homes with their ovens. They don't have any other source, so they turn the oven and the stove on and that's it. And so when you see these fire stories, that's where it's coming from. And look at the locale, where it usually is, North Baton Rouge. So, but we do put all of that in. Yes, ma'am.
After you improve these houses in a neighborhood, do you have some mechanism for having the people that live there take ownership and maybe form an association to kind of keep standards high?
Question is, after we finish working on a house, do we have any kind of mechanism to sort of build a neighborhood cohort that would help people to keep the standards that we've raised, keep them there, keep them high, and keep moving in the right direction? No, I wish we did. And I just heard last week on National Public Radio about an organization that I think is called Capable, and they do that kind of thing. And it's a nationwide thing. Well, nationwide, it's got about a dozen, and we're investigating that. What we really need is some caseworkers, people that can go and then work with the homeowners and help them to improve themselves, energize them so that they will take the next steps. Yeah, we've been a triage operation, and I characterize Rebuilding Together Baton Rouge as the experience of you need an automobile that you can drive down the highway, but you've got to build it, but you've got to do it while you're going 60. That's kind of where we are. It's a never-ending churning of meeting needs and responding to this request and that. So it's a very good point, though, and what I hope will one day come to be reality. Yes.
You talked about the, your revenue versus your expenses.
Yes.
How you were going backwards right now.
Right.
If you get into a bind, do you ever get any help from the national office?
Only to the extent that National has access to some grants that then they can invite us to apply for through some of our national partners. For example, Lowe's, the hardware people, the Lowe's stores, they're a big supporter of Rebuilding Together National. Sears, which has fallen on some hard times, but Sears is another partner historically with Rebuilding Together. And so the national office will let us know there's a grant opportunity from Lowe's. It may be 100,000, 200,000, but what that means is each affiliate can get up to, say, 12,000. The most we've ever gotten through our national office is $15,000 for a grant. So it's not a real strong revenue source, but it is at times that. And they provide support. They would help us if we wanted to work on the CDBG funds, which may be the direction that we've got to go. I'm just, at this point in my life, not sure that I think somebody else might need to be in this chair than me when you do that, because you're stepping into a whole new world, So, yes, sir.
So how are you guys trying to address the funding shortfall you foresee right now?
How are we trying to address the funding shortfall that we experience? Well, we ask for money. And I'm not being facetious about that. That's literally what we do. This year, if I could have found 3 $100,000 contributors, 300,000, then we would be in the black. Well, I haven't been able to do that, but I've gone to lunch and had conversations with several people inviting them to be that individual or those individuals. So we do that. We do the traditional thing of a year-end appeal. We will invite, and we've, cultivated and created relationships with people over the years. So we'll be sending out letters asking people to think of us as they determine what their year-end support will be for charitable purposes. And then we have some partners that we have been able to consistently rely upon to step up and give us what for us is a sizable donation, $50,000. And I'll name the Credit Bureau Foundation of Baton Rouge has been a wonderful partner for us, and they have financed roofs with their donation. That's how we approach them. Give us X number of dollars, we can do X number of roofs. So that's what we do. If I'm answering the question, I know it sounds awfully scattershot, and it is, but it's what we are. It's what we do, and how we operate. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, I imagine that most of them are candidates for rehabilitation of the houses that y'all do are actually owned by the people who live there, but what about in those situations where you have neighborhoods where, you know, really, owned by people who live there, but just have tenants living there? Do any of those kinds of things?
I may not have heard, you're saying that you're imagining that most of our clients own their homes. But what about those neighborhoods? Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, in some instances, you know, you just got whole blocks of properties where it's, you know, people that used to own it might still own it, but they're renting the property.
What about renter park? Yes, thank you, good question. So the question is, what does Rebuilding Together do with owner-occupied houses versus rent homes? Our bylaws and regulations talk about home ownership. We don't want to help slum landlords, and you know, it's dicey when you work on somebody's house for the people that are living in the house, but the title is belonging to somebody else. So our primary objective is to help homeowners stay in their homes. Now, there are exceptions, and that's the nimbleness of Rebuilding Together. We have worked on homes that are rent homes for special circumstances, but always in consultation with the bona fide owner of the structure, so that, you know, they agree that whatever we're doing is okay with them for us to do it. We had, as an example, a call from the Lady of the Lake Hospital. A little boy had been severely injured in a train accident. And this is where we say we work on elderly people's homes, but also disabled people, veterans, those kind of things. So this little boy had been injured terribly. He'd almost lost the lower part of one leg. He'd been in the Lady of the Lake for 3 months. It's time for him to be discharged, but he couldn't get into his house without a ramp. He lived in a trailer park off of Airline Highway, Victoria Trailer Park, and they contacted and said, can you build him a ramp? We had the ramp up in a day, you know, so, but we had to call the landlord and do all that kind of due diligence and that. So we do that. Yes, sir.
As some of the work has started to like ramp up in the North Baton Rouge area, you kind of, you know, North Baton Rouge has recently announced, you know, the
Plank Road, right.
Kind of smart heights thing. Are you guys really focused on that area as well to try to aid in whatever way you can, or?
Well, we're certainly supportive of those efforts. This is a question, are we in any kind of relationship or partnership with Bill Baton Rouge or with their reimagined Plank Road effort, or the Smiley Heights development that was announced through the big grant that has been given to the city, announced just in the last couple of days in the local newspaper? Formally, no, but heartfelt, yes. I mean, we support that. We will do our part, and, you know, applaud the successes that those organizations have. A lot of what goes on in a community is what I call feel-good efforts. Feel-good efforts are fine. We all need to feel good, but not transformational efforts. And so we try to work on that transformational side of it, so that what we do has the kind of lasting consequence and impact that really does help to transform the situation into a better situation than it is. Our dream is to be able to go and do what we did right after the flood. Take a street like we did Tioga Street, or the street behind that, or the street behind that, and do the whole street. But that's complicated work. You got to figure out who's living in those houses. You got to know which ones are owner occupied, which ones are rental, or where the age levels are, all kinds of things that have to go into that. So we've not, again, because we are so thin in terms of our administrative capacity, we've not been able to do that. We're just out there working hard every day, trying to get things done. Let me say something about our financing, one more. I said, this year, $300,000 is a lot of money. Probably is a lot of money for everybody in this room except Jim Inkster, I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a lot of money. Anyway, we can do a lot of work for less than $300,000, and we are doing a lot of work. We don't have to have the $300,000 in order to continue to be rebuilding together Baton Rouge. The reason we have that as a benchmark or a goal is because that keeps us at the level that we have arrived at post-flood. And we want to keep that volume up because the need is so great. But even if we don't get that kind of revenue, we will continue to work. We just won't do as much work as we have been doing. So it's that kind of thing. Any other questions? Well, I hope that the literature you have, thank you. Thank you. I hope the literature is helpful.